I would like to begin with the following statement. Never, ever, ever, please, for the love of all that is holy, never let a human see this missive. They may kill us all. I went to this demonstration as a result of humanity's introduction to the galaxy. Average intelligence, average build, average strength, speed, fleets, warships, weapons. Humans are the average. This much the galaxy knew. This is, however, not the handicap most would have expected, least of all the humans. Turns out being average at everything means everyone wants you, because it means, generally speaking, you aren't bad at anything, but you aren't good at anything either. Humanity quickly filled in much-needed gaps in the galactic economy. This gained them a significant modicum of respect, and the longer they worked, the more entrenched they became, to the point where they started making new averages. They just kept getting better and better, raising the bar, as it were. But still, they were just average. That is until it comes to the concept of weaponry. Mostly. Human weaponry is just above or below the galactic average depending on what the fleet composition is at the time. That was until we found one crazy dude and his buddies on a backwater planet fiddling with some kind of odd device they apparently created for fun. Before I found this backwater planet, humans were just a curiosity or labor force that we simply appreciated. I am writing this missive because what I saw on this planet scared me out of my skin. It is my considered opinion that humans are far beyond the average because they appear to be some kind of strange reality-warping entity. I will make the process of understanding this simple. All my readers will likely be non-humans, so to make this simple, humans have this habit of combining things with other things that shouldn't be a thing. But for some reason they like, or something that works. For some reason. The human concept of the sandwich foodstuff comes to mind. You combine bread with butter, then something else, you get a sandwich. What about the stranger versions of this combination? Peanut butter and honey. Sugar. Nothing else, just butter and sugar. Sugar sandwich, apparently. Why? And also the stranger forms of food, usually eaten by females during certain periods of their lives for some reason. Peanut butter, ice cream, and pickles? That's just awful. But apparently they get cravings, so who are we to judge? What I'm talking about is an exceedingly dangerous form of this obsession with combinations. One that threatens to rip the fabric of reality to oblivion. One that threatens to overwhelm and kill us all. Something that works but really, really shouldn't. One that doesn't make any sense, but still kind of does make sense, for some reason. All of this starts when I'm invited to join a coworker on a company vacation. During this time, I come across a bunch of weird dudes in a backwater town used for something called airsoft and paintball, a topic for another day. This group of dudes has some kind of strange device within their camp. And because I arrived carrying bottles of beer, they invited me in to watch the fun while they experimented with their reality warping device. I wish I hadn't known it existed. The very thought terrifies me. The device they were using was called a thing mixer. It was a strange device with a central console and multiple flat panels above and to the side. Each of the panels had some strange locking mechanisms and contained a seemingly random item in its slot. The front panel had a very selective collection of weaponry, usually cheap stuff you can get at an arms dealer, apparently. The men involved were 8 of them, 4 dressed as SWAT personnel and 4 dressed as terrorists. For some reason, was this a game of some sort that children played? I had no idea. Once I sat down and handed out the cans of beer I was holding, I watched one of them, a man called Lich, apparently the ringleader and creator of this strange device, approach and select some things. He chose a weapon called an M4, a weapon called a P90, and a pot of salt and a potato. I was more than just a bit confused. Why would there be a potato and a pot of salt? What the hell was this supposed to do? I got my answer when the chosen items disappeared from the devices panel, and a new item appeared on the table. And by appeared, I really do mean that. No secret latch, no closed box system. The new device just phased out of the machine's body and flopped onto the table. Boys, the assault rifle, Lich said, holding up his creation. They all began laughing hysterically at the device. It was an M4 rifle, its barrel cut short and replaced with a large conical implement, with its magazine slot replaced by a pot of salt. Lich then pressed a big blue button on the console and, from oblivion itself, a clone of a human appeared. It seemed sluggish, slow, unresponsive, almost like it was both alive and dead all at once. Lich aimed the weapon at the clone and the most obnoxious, abusive, screamingly loud noise erupted from it, and the clone recoiled in pain, covering its ears. This didn't last long, and the noise was so horrendously bad, a sound made up of made-up curses, hastily gasped swear words, all of which sounded like they were coming out of a cheap radio. The clone's head exploded. The men all looked at the result, staring blankly at the fresh corpse for a minute or so. Then all burst out into hysterical laughter. Lich put the weapon away in a storage container nearby and rearmed the machine, putting a pot of salt, an M4, a potato, and a P90 back into their respective slots. One of the other guys called James stood up and tried his own hand at the device, in this case going for a weapon called a butterfly knife and an AK-47 rifle. I got the basic idea for how the machine worked at this point. It used a hidden, undetermined mechanism to combine weapons and parts into other weapons and parts that shouldn't exist. How in the absolute blue blazes do you combine a projectile weapon with a melee weapon? Stupid. The machine did its work and James hoisted up the device. "Behold, the AK Ordian," he said, and moved the strange weapon that resulted in it making a very loud, ear-wrenching noise that sounded like someone was stretching a piano. All the men burst into hysterics again and collapsed in laughter as James began to play the device like a musical instrument. The sound it made was actually quite impressive. It was music, and despite the straining tone, it actually was quite nice. It was just an AK-47 with some kind of strange folding piece between the firing mechanism and the barrel. James then demonstrated the weapon. This is the moment I knew I was dealing with some kind of eldritch power of reality bending madness. It bent. The entire front of the barrel bent sideways, up or down. I knew how human guns worked, and this is not how guns work. Despite the barrel and trigger being at a full 90-degree angle relative to each other, the gun fired and hit a tree nearby. The gun was then bent in various positions that no gun should ever be in, then fired, exactly as it normally would have if it were straight and solid. I strained every neuron in my brain to find out how exactly this was possible. How was the bullet leaving the chamber and not exploding? How was the gun being fired? What material was it made of? Were the bullets curving or something? Was there some anti-reality device hidden in that gun that made it do what it did? James rearmed the machine from a nearby weapon storage box, and the next guy, Vlad, stepped up. He chose weapons that included the M4, the Tech-9, MAC-10, a CZ Auto, a taser for some reason, and a Molotov. Vlad lifted his creation up. "Behold, the M4 The men all celebrated, not with hysterics, but with awe and excitement. It was an M4 rifle with heavy modification. Where does the machine get the parts? How does it disassemble them and reassemble them? How did it do it so fast? Some of the components didn't even look like they could have been a part of a gun of any kind. It looked as though it had exhaust from a vehicle mounted to the barrel. The magazine looked like it had some odd circular rings on it, and it had 2 heavy-duty flashlights mounted to it too. Vlad moved with it and summoned a new clone. He then demonstrated the headlights feature of the weapon, and by all the holy matriarchs was that bright. The entire forest behind the clone lit up with a clone-shaped shadow. Then the clone began to scream in terror and run in random directions because it had caught fire. Vlad then fired the weapon, creating one of the most obnoxious noises I've ever heard, like a heavily modified, probably illegally car engine I had ever heard. 1,000 rounds left the chamber in a few short seconds, each pull of the trigger sounding like the press of an accelerator pedal on a race car. The clone was obliterated to absolute shreds with the sheer volume of fire and bullets, then abruptly stopped screaming. At this point, my brain ceased normal function. My entire being was consumed by how, not why. I already knew the why. Humans are insane. That was why. But how was my biggest concern? Was there a hidden car engine in there? How was it constructed? How did it work? Was the gas from the gunpowder in the bullets the reason it fired so fast? Was the magazine attachment some kind of turbo device? That was a 30-round magazine. How did he fire 1,000 rounds from that tiny thing? I had no time to recollect as the board was rearmed. Lich took command again. He chose the combat knife, silenced pistol, silenced sniper rifle, a submachine gun, and pushed the mix button. Out came the stupidest thing I had ever seen in the history of stupid things. It was a knife. A knife with a bipod, scope, and suppressor. Why was I looking at this? How was I looking at this? How did that even work? "Behold, the tactical silence knife, or the TISK," he said. The group all went once again into hysterics as Lich called in a new clone to test it. Lich tested it by standing 5 feet away from the clone. How would that work? The blade was only 3 inches. I got my answer and nearly jumped out of my skin as Lich's arms extended forward and stabbed the clone to death. His limbs stretched beyond normal capacity that I thought possible for his muscle structure, as if some strange eldritch force was turning his arms to gelatine. He was striking with speed I never thought possible too, and put a dozen knife wounds into the clone at an abnormal distance within seconds. I rubbed my eye sockets and tried to understand what I was actually looking at as the next clone was summoned, with Lich immediately attacking from a prone position. It wasn't a mistake or a fluke. His arms did it again. They stretched beyond natural capacity and stabbed the clone to death in seconds. Lich put the Tisk away and took a victory lap to a round of applause as the next guy, Artyom, took the lead. He took the AK as a base, the taser, and an old wireless modem, and pressed the button. Out came a wireless AK. It was an AK-47 with its magazine replaced by a small communications dish of some kind, with a bunch of magazines inserted into a bandolier with some kind of wireless network hub as a backpack. Artyom summoned a new clone and readied the weapon. He fired, spraying the clone down with a few hundred rounds. It's fired bullets. It had no magazine, and fired bullets anyway. Did these fucking crazy humans just find a way to teleport bullets into guns? Did they seriously just warp reality to the point they could teleport bullets from magazines directly into guns wirelessly and fire them? This was when I started panicking. I didn't want to alert the humans because their drunken play seemed to have made them forget about me. Artyom put the bandolier down and walked away. We watched with awe as he turned a nearby tree into a target and sprayed it with bullets. I watched in shock as the magazines on the belt on the bandolier emptied. Artyom returned, all ammo expended, and triumphantly put the gun away before reloading the machine. James stepped up again and started with something new. He searched through the panel of other objects and selected something I couldn't see, a selection of what looked like fancy dice, and then selected the fragmentation grenade. Out came 5 green grenades that looked like plastic toys. "Behold, the Lego grenade," he said, summoning a clone. The jubilation from the men wasn't there. Instead, it was met by a wave of sympathetic ows and oohs. He threw the grenade and it exploded shortly after spreading a number of strange plastic bricks and small plastic dice around the place. I wondered what this was for. The men around all cringed sympathetically as the clone was ordered to cross the field. The clone did as commanded and, despite wearing heavy boots, began screaming in agony as his limbs twisted in strange positions and collapsed on the ground. The bricks made his limbs twist in some odd way and the dice made him slip or go straight through the boot's leather and into his feet. This made no sense. Did the grenade warp reality to the point the bricks became gravitationally unstable? Did it modify the bricks' mass or slipperiness? What about those dice, which I now know to be D4ES? How did they penetrate armor or thick boot leather? How did any of this happen? The results were more than apparent. The men all clapped at the sound of the clone's screaming finally ending. James trotted about proudly and put the rest of the grenades away before reloading the machine. Artyom stepped up again and uncovered a button, a big red button with a big white label on it, and then retrieved an APC from nearby. This particular APC was a tank hull equipped with a crane, as opposed to anything else, and positioned it in a specific way. He then chose one of the machine guns, 4 separate magazines, and then hit the big button. Nothing appeared after a bit. Then I heard a huge heavy thunk come from my right. From Oblivion itself, a gigantic weapons magazine appeared out of nowhere next to the APC. The magazine had a small machine gun on the top of it connected to the magazine. It was basically a small LMG on a gigantic magazine. Must have been hundreds of thousands of rounds in that thing. "Behold, the Megagev!" he bellowed, triumphantly climbing atop the strange device and readying it to fire. The men all responded with a cheer. I was handed a set of headphones or ear protectors, whatever the humans call them, and made to cover my ears. Artyom pulled the trigger and turned a specific portion of the forest into a hole as the weapon fired with a truly unimaginable rate of fire. It wasn't a machine gun, it was a solid beam of white-hot projectiles. It wasn't a spray of bullets, it was a beam of light made of bullets. The gun itself he was using caught fire somehow. He laughed and pulled it off, then retrieved another gun from a basket nearby and fired again. The noise was nothing short of soul-breaking. How did this thing appear? The reality-warping insanity, of course. What was the purpose of this weapon in the first place? How would it even work? Why does it work? Is the APC a carrier for it? This could be a weapon unlike any if they planned to put it on a tank hull and drive it around. No army could withstand that level of firepower. Before I could contemplate this further, the APC picked it up, and to a sound of applause, the weapon was put away in a cargo crate. Lich stepped up for his turn, choosing the AK again, and then the double-barrel shotgun. Out came a new gun. "Behold, the double-barrel AK-47. He said. This one confused the men around him, and they asked what possible use that could be. It was the body and stock of the AK, but with 2 AK barrels. He demonstrated the fact it was loaded the same way the double barrel was loaded by splitting the weapon in half, showing how it was hinged in front of the trigger. He aimed and fired 2 bullets from the front. He then smiled sadistically as he flipped the weapon around and split it. 2 bullets shot out of the thing like a pair of grenades, causing 2 small explosions in front of him. He took a victory lap as the men congratulated him with applause for his innovation. How the hell did that work? I had no time to think about it. Artyom stepped forward, putting Lich's weapon back in storage and trying the same combination again, an AK and a double-barrel shotgun. The result had the body grip and stock of the AK, but the barrel and length in the double-barrel shotgun. It split open the same way as the double-barrel did. The body of the AK looked like it did, but when Artyom opened it to show, it looked like a bunch of shotgun shells were stored in a back. The top of the AK had become a magazine for shells. "Behold the double-barrel AK," he said. He moved to a firing position and demonstrated the weapon. Firing 2 shells, then splitting the gun, then putting it back, then firing 2 shells. The act of simply splitting the weapon acted as a mechanism for ejecting spent casings and then reloading new shells. He emptied the magazine and split the weapon again. He replaced the top part of the gun and closed it, firing 2 more shells. The result was an overwhelming sense of applause and accomplishment. He named it the double-barrel auto and took a victory lap. I, on the other hand, was absolutely terrified. It suddenly dawned on me what kind of thing they could accomplish here. These 2 obscenely powerful, versatile weapons were created with only 2 combinations of weapons. How many combinations can each gun have? There were a dozen guns here. Humans had thousands of different types of weapons. There could be millions of different combinations here based on just these few. What happens if they do more? What happens if they somehow manage to get a big version of this reality warping device and use it on starships? James stepped up next, still applauding, but wanted to do something a bit bigger. He chose 2 weapons, some kind of semi-automatic shotgun and a rocket launcher looking like a disposable variant. He didn't take it himself, though. He handed it to a very hefty-looking man called Reggie. The muscle-bound lad stood with the new rectangular-shaped weapon and stood still as James loaded a heinously oversized shotgun shell into the breech. James stood aside and swung his arm down. Reggie pulled the trigger and a huge cannon shot sounded through the forest. The sound of dozens of loud cannonball-sized shotgun pellets hitting a forest made my ears ring, the sound of splintering wood and echoing gunfire. James stood up and said, "Behold, the shot PG." The crowd of drunken louts applauded and my panic got worse. They had the ability to use this thing with heavy munitions? Artillery or anti-armor weaponry? What kinds of damage could they do if those cannonballs were explosive shells? I visibly retched at the implication. Lich stepped up one more time and went for a pump-action shotgun, 2 different light machine guns, an SMG called a Bison, and a P90. He then pressed the button, and out came a pump-action shotgun with 2 circular magazines under the trigger mechanism. He picked it up and headed for a safe spot. He racked a shell and fired. He looked smug about it. Then he racked another shell, then another, then 3 more. Each time he pumped the mechanism, the barrel extended. The barrel of the shotgun itself physically gained more mass and length with each shell racked. Then he racked a total of 18 shells, then fired. The barrel was now a full 8 feet long. The recoil was more than he could handle, and it threw him off his feet and made him slide several feet backwards, still holding the gun with a death grip. He got up very quickly and raised his hands in celebration to a round of applause from the drunken louts. Then James stepped up again and started a new weapon, reloading the board. He did this with a strange, sadistic, almost perverted giggle as he loaded an old-looking semi-auto rifle in a thing called a Thompson. "Behold, the Super Garand," he said. It was just a weapon called a Garand with a circular drum magazine under the grip. The men all looked at him as he emitted a debased cackle and stood nearby us so we could hear. He pulled the trigger, and it didn't fire a bullet, it just pinged. A strangely delightful metallic ping noise erupted from the weapon, and a clip flopped harmlessly on the grassy soil. He pulled the trigger again, and again no bullet, just a ping, the strange sound making my heart jump and my skin tingle. What was this sensation? The other men were similarly perturbed, and shook violently with some kind of delightful tingle I never saw before or since as James made the gun ping 6 more times in succession. He moved away and summoned some clones. Then he started to rapidly squeeze the trigger. We could barely hear the pinging noise, but the clones were very clearly not having a good time, as they all grabbed their crotches and squealed in agony. Then, as if some strange force made them do it, the clones began pelvic thrusting themselves to death. Still cackling debasedly, James returned and stored the weapon to the disgusted expressions of his friends. He cackled and reloaded the device and allowed Artyom to use it again. Artyom grabbed all the shotguns, using the double barrel as the baseline, and pushed the button. He held the hideously unwieldy contraption up and said, "Behold, the shototototot gun." It was a shotgun stock and handle with 16 shotgun barrels and 16 separate triggers mounted on the underside in line with each other. At first, Artyom didn't really know how to use it, and he stumbled about with it for a bit, looking at it to see how it worked. He then snapped his fingers and readied himself to fire it. Like one would do to the keys on a piano, he started at the farthest trigger and pulled back as fast as possible. Each trigger pulled one of the barrels. Seemingly a random barrel fired a shell and splattered anything in front of it with hundreds of pellets. Artyom visibly curled back, using his feet to steady himself, his heels digging into the dirt from the recoil as he emptied the gun in a second. The weapon was now expended. Artyom fixed this by removing its top and replacing the barrels with new barrels. I looked inside the discarded item. It was all shells that fit the entire length of the barrel. He fired it again, this time with all the shells loaded being explosive slugs. A fireworks show of explosions racked the shattered forest trees as splinters of wood flew everywhere. The group applauded, and for the last one, at least the one I saw, Lich stepped forward. He chose a weapon called a minigun, one I had never seen before, and all the shotguns, then pressed the button. "Behold, Shotgunovich." The minigun barrel had been replaced with 6 pump-action shotgun barrels, the drum that had all the ammo replaced with a drum full of shotgun shells, and the entire mechanism mounted on a circular firing system that made the pump-action handles pull back to load each shell. Lich stepped forward and readied to fire. He pulled the trigger and the barrels began to rotate at obscene speeds. He yelled out, "Slugs!" and the weapon fired a stream of solid slugs towards a tree that ripped itself apart from the impact. He then yelled, "Buckshot!" and aimed at another tree. That tree rapidly disintegrated into toothpicks. He then yelled, "Explosive!" and aimed at a section of the forest. Within seconds, 10 entire trees were turned into splintered sawdust. Then finally he yelled out, "Dragon's breath!" and set a section of the forest on fire with the resulting barrage of incendiary bullets. It was at this point my brain ceased functionality and I passed out. I later woke up in a hospital bed. This is not the tale of a man suffering from delirium or narcotics overdose. This is a true account of what I witnessed in that forest. And I am truly terrified of the reality-warping entity that exists within the human spirit. I do not know how they made that machine, or if they did make it. I'm told it is a common occurrence for that machine to exist and be used to experiment when humans are bored. I have no idea how its mechanisms work or why. All I know is that machine represents the single most dangerous thing in the universe. We must acquire one. Not just because of the implications this machine represents. Not just because we need to, even the playing field with the psycho-humans who created miniguns that shoot incendiary shotgun shells. Not just because of the potential applications of the device if we can figure out how its reality-warping mechanisms work. Not just because of what we might create if we ever got a hold of one. But primarily I want to see what it does with laser or plasma weaponry. I would strongly recommend to the council that you acquire one as quickly as possible. They already have the big one. I saw it make a 6-barreled tank, which isn't good. Sincerely. Thrax Thrantar of Clan Olm, treasurer of the Royal Society for being terrified and screwed.